We're ready to go. So I appreciate everybody's patience with our this technology. It's a blessing and a curse sometimes, but I think it gives us the opportunity from all across the state to get together and be able to have access to these wonderful speakers that we're going to be able to hear from today. My name is Amy Ingalls, and I am a Community and Economic Development Educator at the University of Illinois Extension, and I cover the Unit 12, it's called, and it is McLean, Livingston, and Woodford counties. There are about 16 educators that do community and economic development across the state for the University of Illinois Extension. So I just wanted to make everybody on the conference aware of that fact so that if you ever need to reach out and contact anybody in your area, that you have that information. Just briefly a little bit about the University of Illinois Extension and the Community and Economic Development Program. And I'll call it CED for it is a mouthful. We do work in the following areas: community leadership development, participatory community planning, organizational development, and community and economic development. So I think it's important to point that out because not a lot of people know that it exists, but it is done, and it's been a tradition that goes back for more than 95 years. And we're committed to providing educational programs that help people make their lives better, easier, safer, and more profitable. So if you wanted to get more information about what some of the CED educators do, you can visit extension.illinois.edu. So with that, I'm just going to get right into our presentation on the called the Legislative Update for 2013. And this is some information for the elected officials out there, so you can find out what some of the recent legislative changes are that might be impacting you directly, and that following this most recent veto session. And I will turn it over to Deborah, but let me tell you a little bit about Deborah. She comes to us from the National Association of Counties, and she's currently serving as the Legislative Director. And in this capacity, she's responsible for the legislative and executive branch outreach advocacy for the association's legislative priorities and policy development. Before joining NACO, Ms. Cox served as the Director of Government Relations and Legislative Affairs for the National Association of Development Organizations, which represents the nation's local government-based regional planning and development organizations. Previously, she worked for Capitol Hill for Representative Rodney Alexander of Louisiana. And prior to her time on the Hill, Cox worked for the Livingston Group, founded by House Appropriations Chairman Bob Livingston, and the government relations firm Zealous Enterprises, founded by Congressman Bill Zila. So please help me in welcoming Deborah Cox. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, wonderful. Well, today, Amy and folks asked me to give a brief update from the local government perspective on some of the things that we at the National Association of Counties are working on, particularly some of our top legislative issues. So it's wonderful to be on the call with you all today. So again, I'm Deborah Cox. I'm the relatively new Legislative Director at the National Association of Counties. NACO represents the nation's 3,069 counties, which is almost over 19,000 elected county board members and other elected executives. So this year we haven't been embarking on kind of a theme of why counties matter to educate not only the general public but also Congress and the administration on the role that local government and particular counties play at the local level. And so we've been kind of hitting hard on this theme that if counties were an industry, they'd be almost over a $472 billion industry with over 3.3 million employees. Recently, we did just have a Hill briefing on why counties matter and specifically what's at stake in the ongoing budget negotiations for local governments, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But overall, some of the key issues that we've been really focused on this year include the White House, OMB, and federal agency regulatory review. There's a lot of regulations that will impact local governments as far as time and cost for projects and other things. The Affordable Care Act and impact on counties, the FY14 appropriations process, immigration reform and the potential county impact, PILT and secure rural schools. PILT is the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program. Marketplace Fairness Act, which is also called the Existing Remote or Online Sales Tax Bill. The Farm Bill, workforce reauthorization, and also gearing up for transportation reauthorization in the coming year. Some of the key issues and timelines that we've been focused on are sequestration, which, as you know, are the across-the-board automatic cuts that were supposed to begin in January of last year, but actually began in March of this year. The next round is scheduled right now to begin mid-January of 2014, unless they figure out a solution, basically in the next few weeks. We've been watching closely, as I said, the 2014 appropriations process, which is currently unfinished. The federal government is operating under a continuing resolution until January 15th. We'll get into that more in just a little bit. December 13th is that key deadline for the Budget Conference Committee to reach some sort of agreement on the overall funding levels for FY14, and they might also deal with sequestration. Also closely looking at the federal debt ceiling. This is estimated to need to be raised around February or March timeline. Obviously, the U.S. Department of Treasury does have some wiggle room and can use some extraordinary measures to postpone that a little bit if they have those at their disposal. We've also been following really closely tax and entitlement reform. Congressional hearings did start this year, but those issues will be punted into the next year. But as we get into the legislative presentation, I thought it might be helpful to offer a little bit of context, both economic and political, into some of the things that are happening in Washington right now. First of all, our budget deficit has hit record highs over the last 5 years, basically topping over $1 trillion each of those years. In fact, the federal debt held by the public is now about 73% of the economy's annual output. Basically the gross domestic product, which is higher than at any point in U.S. history except for a brief period around World War II. It is interesting to note, however, that the latest CBO projections, that's the Congressional Budget Office, show that this year our budget deficit is going to potentially fall under that $1 trillion mark to around $680 billion. So that's a good thing. But while these latest projections show that the deficit is starting to decrease in the short term, basically 2012 through, say, 2015, it is anticipated to remain at historically high levels through the next decade. And as we know, absent any major reforms from Congress and the administration, the debt is expected to skyrocket in the future. Why is it expected to skyrocket? As you can see in this next slide, primarily due to rising entitlement costs. Also, healthcare costs have been a concern, although the latest projections on those show that healthcare costs are evening out. And we know it's not just the federal government facing these challenges. According to the Government Accountability Office, that's called GAO, state and local sectors are definitely facing similar pressures with a growing gap between receipts and expenditures in future years. And with all the gridlock and worry over the economy, as you all know, it's really no surprise that the public is generally displeased. This is a recent, somewhat recent Gallup poll that showed that over 60% of the public feeling that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And then, as you know, Congress in the last few months has also hit its lowest approval rating in a long time. It was around 12 or 13%, now dropped down to about 8 or 9%. We see a similar trend with President Obama's approval ratings, also having dropped in recent weeks from around 50% down to about 40%. Also this year, The White House's agenda has been really distracted by a lot of scandals or other international events and some other issues, including the IRS issues, Benghazi, the DOJ phone record issue, Syria, and then as of late, the Affordable Care Act enrollment website issues. And then on to this next slide. We have a team here in Washington of about 15 lobbyists, and we handle hundreds and hundreds of issues within all of my team's portfolios. But as we look at all of these issues facing counties in this environment, we've been focusing on what we call the triple threat. And that includes entitlement reform and particularly potential changes to Medicaid. The second is tax reform and the threats against municipal bonds. And then that third is the annual appropriations process, including the sequester. So why do counties care about Medicaid? As you can see from this slide, entitlements are still on the menu as Congress and the administration continue to look for ways to find additional revenue. And as they continue to make tough budget decisions, they are definitely looking at entitlements. And again, why do counties care about Medicaid? Well, if you look at the major entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security are 100% federal, whereas Medicaid financing administration is federal, state, and county. In particular, in 32 states, counties are required to provide health care for low-income, uninsured or underinsured residents, and then in 22 states, counties put up part of the non-federal match for Medicaid. So that's kind of why we've been really looking out for Medicaid, and whenever talks of the grand bargain start to heat up, that's when we have really been engaged in the dialogue of what counties, what the role is in health care, with all the counties owning a lot of hospitals around the country, nursing homes, and other things. We've also been looking at tax reform, again, in these kind of ongoing negotiations around revenue and around a grand bargain. And again, tax reform has been a major concern, particularly the threats to taxes at municipal bonds. It kind of started with the 2010 Simpson-Bowles Commission, and there have been several proposals since then, as you can see on this slide, particularly from the administration and most recently in the Senate's FY 2014 budget resolution, basically proposing some caps on the deductions, which could include some of the exemptions for the interest earned on state and local municipal bonds. And then, as you know, tax reform has pretty much stalled right now and taken a backseat to some of the recent continuing resolution and debt negotiations. However, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Max Baucus and House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Camp have both said that they'd like to get a bill done and have made that one of their priorities. And as you know, Senator Baucus is retiring next year, and Chairman Camp is currently term limited in his position on the House Ways and Means Committee. So it's almost becoming a legacy issue for them, but most likely tax reform is going to be punted into the next year. Well, it definitely is. And then as we move to the next slide, again, that third issue, that third thing on our triple threat is kind of this appropriations process. Where are we right now? I know many of you have probably been tracking this. Maybe we can blame it all on the super committee. I say that in somewhat with jest, but it was, after all, because of their failure to negotiate a budget deal that basically set into motion the entire sequestration process. Remember that, as I said before, sequestration is automatic across-the-board cuts that are scheduled to occur over the next 10 years. Basically, those cuts over 10 years need to total $1.2 trillion in savings. This evens out to about $109 billion each year that needs to be cut, even though this year we saw a lower number because sequestration was postponed again until March. So you might be asking, what does sequestration have to do with kind of where we are right now in the FY14 appropriations process? Well, basically, Senate appropriators proceeded with drafting their 12 appropriations bills as if sequestration didn't exist, and drafted their overall appropriations bills with a cap of $1.59 trillion. Then you had over on the House side, House appropriators, they wrote all of their bills with the sequester intact at a $967 billion level. So basically you have the House and the Senate appropriators writing their bills with an overall cap that has about a $90 billion difference, basically making it almost impossible for them to negotiate as they move forward on some of the individual bills. So as we know, because no deal was reached before October 1st as far as determining a final numbers for all of the FY14 appropriations bills, the government was shut down for 16 days. Oh, and by the way, the last time the federal government shut down was in 1996, about 17 years ago. But as you know, they finally hashed out a plan to fund the federal government, as I mentioned earlier, through continuing resolution at the current FY 2013 funding levels, which are slightly higher than the sequestration level. And this continuing resolution, also known as a CR, will get us through January 15th of 2014. And as you know, that deal also set into motion a budget conference committee, 29 negotiators made up of members of both parties in both chambers who are tasked with negotiating a top-line spending level for 2014. And I know you all have been following the news. It's basically changing every day. The talks do remain very fluid. But the latest has been that Senate Budget Committee Chairman Patty Murray from Washington and House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan from Wisconsin have been working to wrap up a smaller 2-year deal potentially. This would not be a grand bargain, including some of the things that I mentioned earlier, like tax reform and entitlement reform, but basically a small deal that would put to rest the threat of a government shutdown on January 15th when that current CR expires, and also a deal that would somewhat ease the across-the-board spending cuts, the sequester, due to also take effect in January. So in effect, basically trying to hash out a deal that would establish the top-line spending number for discretionary spending for all the federal government through FY 2014 and 2015. Some of the details are kind of starting to leak out. No one knows the full details, but basically most of the reports say that they're looking at a compromise that would allow spending at about $1 trillion, potentially a little bit higher, which, as you recall, is in the middle of both that House level and that Senate level that they were working on this year. Again, the exact amount is still being determined. And also, they're looking for a package of potential offsets to the planned sequester cuts that would, somehow soften the deal for some of the House Republicans in particular. Right now, they're looking at potential increased fees for airport security and federal employee pension changes. In the possibility that they cannot come up with a number or come up with a number in time, House appropriators are readying another continuing resolution that could last for up to 1 to 3 months. Again, they're kind of having a back pocket plan just in case this budget conference committee isn't able to work out a deal. And nobody wants another government shutdown starting on January 15th. Also remember, I think it's important for everybody to note that if Chairman Murray and Chairman Ryan do reach an agreement, there are several more really key hurdles that would remain. First, they'd have to persuade the rest of the conference committee, the rest of those 29 or 28 members, to support the plan, which is going to be tricky. You've probably heard the reports that a lot of the conferees feel that they haven't been included in the negotiating, that it's primarily been occurring between Chairman Murray and Chairman Ryan. So again, the deal would have to get approved by the full Budget Conference Committee. And then, even more difficult, they would have to have this package, this deal, pass through both chambers of Congress, so both the House and the Senate, which will be tricky in both chambers. So we're all waiting patiently. We're all hopeful that they'll be successful. As we know, there's been a lot of challenges with some of the budget issues. Next year is an election year, so nobody wants any government shutdowns. So we'll see where they are able to come to some agreement, and hopefully that they will. But besides the annual appropriations process and some of the budget issues, there are 2 other pieces of legislation that are in somewhat play right now, even though the possibilities are looking not as good as each day progresses. One bill that's still in play, as you know, is the Farm Bill. The previous Farm Bill extension expired on September 30th, 2013. The Senate passed their Farm Bill in June. The House passed two separate measures. The House did have some challenges, particularly over continued disagreement over changes to the nutrition title of the bill, which includes some cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also called SNAP, formerly the Food Stamp Program. The original House bill wanted to cut the SNAP program by about $20 billion over 10 years. Because Republicans wanted more cuts and Democrats wanted less, they didn't have enough votes, period. So again, the House split their bill. They passed all the other titles under one bill and then decided to move forward with this nutrition title as a separate bill. They then cut SNAP in that bill by $40 billion over 10 years, which won the support from the Republican caucus, and they were able to pass the bill through the full House. As you know, the Farm Bill is in conference right now between the House and the Senate, and negotiations continue through the weekend over the last few weeks. There was getting additional pressure seen, particularly in the last few days, for them to come out with a deal before Congress adjourns this week for the holiday recess, but that's somewhat pretty much unlikely at this point, even though folks were starting to get hopeful that there would be progress this week. So we'll continue to watch the Farm Bill. The counties do have several concerns within, particularly the rural development title. The Senate bill was actually more supportive to some of the county priorities, including some higher mandatory funding levels for things like the water and wastewater backlog, the value-added producer grant program, the rural microenterprise assistance program, and the beginning farmer and rancher development program, just to name a few priorities within the Farm Bill. We are also very supportive of some regional language that the Senate bill included, which basically would allow USDA rural development to focus on resources on a strategic community and economic development plans that come in on a multi-jurisdictional basis. So basically, if multiple communities put in an application together, that might potentially score higher. But basically would encourage local communities to work together. So that language was included in the Senate bill. But again, we continue to watch the Farm Bill. Next, we've also been watching WRDA very closely. This was the second bill I mentioned that's kind of in play right now. For those of you not familiar with WRDA, it's the Water Resources Development Act, basically a biannual bill that authorizes water projects of national significance, particularly dealing with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers projects. WRDA was last enacted in 2007, and it's kind of been caught up in some controversies due to the earmark moratorium or the earmark ban, because that's how Congress was able to pass it in prior years. There was movement this year. The Senate approved a full bill in May. The House approved their version. Actually, they added an R to the title, WRRDA, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. They passed it in October. Why do counties care about WRDA? It clarifies and addresses some of the Army Corps of Engineers vegetation management policies. It provides language that includes state and local governments in decision-making processes. It also includes pilot programs that would allow local governments the lead role in implementing projects and studies, including some stuff on levee safety and invasive species. So we continue to watch WRDA. One of the other key things we've been watching this year very, very closely is immigration reform. As you know, immigration reform has also stalled and will get punted into next year. We've been watching this debate particularly because of the potential mandates that could be passed down to counties, particularly as it relates to health, public safety, and education. Particularly health with the county hospitals, and as I said, the Medicaid piece, public safety with all of the county sheriffs and the jails, and then the mandates in the education realm. Basically, the Senate this year was able to move a comprehensive package, and there was a lot of optimism this year that the House would actually follow suit, although they ended up not. They were trying to, for a more piecemeal approach, passing these smaller bills that they hope to package, but it's become increasingly difficult. We here at NACO were very pleased that we were able to get an amendment in the Senate bill that was offered actually by Senator Feinstein of California that would amend the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, SCAP. Basically, that would allow that program to give reimbursements to local governments for the incarceration of undocumented individuals who've not been convicted of a crime, and who would continue to reimburse counties for unknown individuals who have not been previously put in the Department of Homeland Security database. So again, the federal government often makes legislation at the national level, and some of the mandates, there's a lot of mandates that can get passed down to the local governments, as you know, without increased funding. So that's immigration. Moving on quickly to marketplace fairness. Basically, Marketplace Fairness Act is a bill that would allow states and local governments to collect already existing sales tax from internet retailers with over $1 million in annual out-of-state sales. The Senate did have a vote this very successfully in a bipartisan manner, 69 to 27. The bill is stalled in the House Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Bob Goodlatte of Virginia. The House leadership is not against moving, but a very different version than the Senate. Actually, earlier this fall, there was kind of a positive development. Chairman Goodlatte released his kind of some overall arching principles to guide the discussion on internet sales tax in the Marketplace Fairness Act. We found that positive for two reasons. First of all, it kind of signaled his acknowledgement of the issue, and second, kind of provides another path forward on the issue of taxing remote sales. So we were pleased with that. And then two more priorities very quickly. Payment in lieu of taxes program. For those of you not familiar with the PILT program, it was a program created in 1976, basically to offset some of the costs incurred by counties for services provided to federal employees and families, the public, and the users of public lands. Counties are responsible for a lot of things on public lands, including education, solid waste disposal, law enforcement, search and rescue, health care, environmental compliance, firefighting, parks and recreation, a lot of other things. And because they are not able to collect taxes from those federal lands, PILT provides payments to counties to offset some of those losses in property tax revenues. Basically, counties received their last fully funded PILT disbursement in June of 2013. We've been pushing really hard to get PILT funding in 2014. And basically, we're just looking for the right vehicle at the right time. We've done all sorts of outreach efforts on this. There's a lot of bipartisan support, including both chambers' leadership. Again, it's just a tough climate right now, so we continue to work on the PILT program. And then finally, the Secure Rural Schools Bill. For those of you not familiar with that legislation and that program, it provides assistance to rural counties and school districts affected by the decline in revenue from timber harvest on federal lands. Historically, a lot of rural communities, actually, in schools, have relied on a share of receipts from timber harvest to supplement local funding for some of their education services and roads. And basically, the steep decline in timber sales during the 1980s decreased some of the revenues that the rural school districts receive from the timber sales. So in response to that decline, Congress had passed some legislation basically stabilizing the payments to counties and to compensate for some of that lost revenue. But we had a great win just a few weeks ago. SRS kind of, again, they had received their last payment in January of 2013, and then in October of this year, Congress did pass a bill that included a provision to extend the SRS program for an additional year. So we continue to work on a long-term solution for that. So that is just a quick look at some of the county priorities, and I'm happy to take any questions, but we cover a lot of different issues. Just wanted to highlight a few of our key ones today. Thanks, Amy. Okay, I see some folks are typing questions. Let me go look up. I apologize, I cannot hear anyone. Medicaid reform and nursing homes. Yes, Patrick. On the nursing home issue, yes, it's interesting. A lot of the nursing homes are getting bought by private investors. Yes, yes, definitely. We do, I'm not a health policy expert, but we have seen that trend across the country and have been working with a lot of the State Association of Counties to try to look more at some of the challenges that counties are facing with all of their nursing homes. Jordan, let's see, do you feel like the value-added ag or local foods funding to stay as part of the Farm Bill? We are hopeful. We're hopeful that a lot of that will stay in the final Farm Bill. We've sent action alerts out to our full 40,000 list to advocate for the level that was included in the Senate bill, which was $62.5 million for that value-added producer grant program. So we continue to be hopeful. We've been working very, very closely with both House and Senate committee staff, particularly the Rural Development Subcommittee staff on that issue.
Well,
it's a tough environment. It's a tough environment.
Yes. We really appreciate your very comprehensive overview of all those local issues from a national perspective. We appreciate you being here with us and share all your hard work and in tracking those. And if any other questions arise, oh, there's one more question down there. We'll go ahead and if you have time to answer that, Deborah.
Oh, sure. Is WRDA only for federal? I'm not a WRDA expert, but from what I recall, a lot of them are, it's not for federal water projects. A lot of them go to individual ports, levees, other like channel cleaning, but that's been historically one of the challenges, is because they were able to get support through the bill because everyone was able to get in their kind of pet project for their congressional district. So in this last round, they've kind of limited the number of projects that the WRDA bill would actually authorize for the coming year. So they are, a lot of them have to do with ports, but they are, again, in specific areas. And then there's another one, how about nature conservatories? From what I recall from the WRDA bill, I don't recall it authorizing any nature conservatories, but I'm happy to put you in touch with our transportation lobbyist who could definitely help with that question. Sorry, I don't have the answer.
And as far as contacting, I think everyone has my contact information, and if any questions come up, well, perfect. There's some contact information right there. That is wonderful. And if you don't have time to jot all those down, if you want to contact me, I can pass this page along to you, or if Deborah doesn't mind, I can put you in direct contact with her, or you could just jot her that first line down.
Feel free to call me anytime. Yep, no problem.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
We have Taylor Anderson next. He's going to give us a perspective from our home state of Illinois. Let me introduce our next speaker, Taylor Anderson. He is a contractual consultant with ALC, joined Anderson Legislative Consulting in 2007 following his completion of a Dunn Fellowship in the Legislative Office of the Governor. There he helped design and offer the bill tracking training website for state agency liaisons, as well as work closely with top state agency heads and members of the Illinois Senate. Prior to his fellowship, Taylor began his legislative training by serving as an intern for various state entities and associations. He interned in the Illinois General Assembly on Senate President Emil Jones, Revenue Committee in the Governor's Office of Legislative Affairs. In addition, he interned as a legislative liaison with Illinois Environmental Protection Agency Legislative Affairs Division. where he handles both state and federal issues. Taylor Anderson also works with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Division, where he analyzed voter precinct and researched authored chamber position papers. He worked with Kelly Murray, Illinois Association of County Board Members and Commissioners, organizing seminars for county officials, and contributed to various county newsletters and magazines. He also served as Assistant to Deputy Director of Physical Services for the Secretary of State, Jesse White. So welcome, Taylor. We appreciate you being here and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. So we'll just kind of give a brief overview of the 2013 spring session. We'll talk a little about some of the bills that were passed and signed into law, are pending to be signed into law by the governor. We'll talk a little bit about some of the bills that we saw during the veto session, and then I'll briefly talk about the special session that the General Assembly just had recently to pass the pension reform bill. The first bill we'll talk about is Senate Bill 20. This was a very large economic development package that the General Assembly put together in the final weeks of the spring session and probably the last 2 weeks of May. This has economic development opportunities for the entire state in different regions. There's everything from the long worked upon third airport in the south suburbs to a fertilizer plant in Douglas County. One of the more interesting aspects of this bill dealt with enterprise zones, and they made a couple of different changes to the Enterprise Zone Act. The Enterprise Zone Act, the changes that were made in Senate Bill 20 were several. They made changes to the application process, to some of the reporting requirements, and they also made changes to the siting, the geographic location, the type of businesses. They set a minimum investment threshold and a threshold for job creation. This has been a long time coming. For many years now, the General Assembly has kind of seen enterprise zones being used perhaps too much. Maybe not to the extent that TIF districts have been used, but there was a worry that at some point in the near future, the entire state would either be in an enterprise zone or a TIF district. And so this was an effort to kind of limit the scopes and make sure that the enterprise zones that we currently had were being used and being used effectively. That was kind of slid in on the back door with a lot of the other things that you could see on the slides that went into this very large bill. Another bill was Senate Bill 205, which was recently signed into law, and this allows the state comptroller to contract with third-party collection agencies to collect debt on local government's behalf. Typically, the comptroller would place a fee, a $15 fee. They're allowed to increase the fee to $20 if they do use a third-party collection agency. So, we think this is important because, anytime local governments can maybe get more money or get the money owed to them, we see that as a plus. Senate Bill 494, another bill that was signed into law by the governor, is a pilot program just for DuPage County. This bill is very interesting. The implications that this could have in the future for other counties if it's expanded, I think it'd be very beneficial to be used. What this bill allowed DuPage County to do is to dissolve or consolidate by ordinance county agencies that had non-elected officials. So, there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of talk. We kind of haven't heard as much about it recently, but in years prior, about consolidation, about the size of local governments. Everyone knows Illinois has the most units of local government in the country, and so this was a proactive effort by DuPage County to kind of take on that issue, get in front of the issue. and to be able to do it at the local level. I think this makes a lot of sense. There's been bills passed previously and introduced previously to try to allow the state to come in to counties and consolidate local governments on their behalf. I think the proper place, and I think DuPage County, and luckily the governor and the General Assembly agreed, is for counties to be able to look within themselves and see whether there may be some areas to consolidate if it makes sense. So, this sets in place a public audit. There's a 6-month public review process before the government entity can be dissolved. There's also, this sets in place a backdoor referendum. So again, this is just kind of a pilot program right now just for DuPage County. This is one of those new laws that we'll see how it works in DuPage. It may need some tweaks, or it may work perfectly. It may not work at all. We need to look at other options. But again, I think this is a positive step moving forward, recognizing that there may be some areas for money saving and consolidation and just more efficiency at the local level. Senate Bill 1430 is another bill that, I think expands opportunities for counties. We all know that the economic times are very difficult and that certainly county budgets are being squeezed. And so this just allows counties other than Cook County to borrow from local banks instead of having to use a tax anticipation warrant, as long as those funds are going to be repaid within 2 years. Again, this just expands maybe some more opportunities for counties. Senate Bill 1664 was the Telecommunication Act extension bill. This isn't the extension bill that we had thought it was going to be. The deadline, the sunset was this year, 2013, and so, we needed to do some type of extension, certainly for E911. The problem is that there was a lot of other issues that cropped up when the General Assembly was looking at just extending out the E911 deadline. So this bill, unfortunately, it doesn't make any changes to the existing 5% franchise fee to local governments. It also doesn't make any changes to the dollars that are going to be put in to E911. What it does do, though, is it gives us 2 years to sit down and have a very long and large conversation about what needs to happen moving forward, because, as we know, technology is fast outpacing some of the fee structures that have been set in place. So those conversations will be continuing. This really just, it kind of maintains the status quo and keeps everyone, all the different various groups that are interested, it keeps them at the table and to continue to have conversations. Senate Bill 1715 was a hydraulic fracturing regulatory act, or fracking as it's commonly called. This was also a very, very large bill. I will say that, this is kind of more of a southern Illinois issue. This doesn't really affect a lot of the states, or a lot of the counties across the state. This is really kind of a regional issue. But again, because of some of the concerns, this environmentally, this turns to a very, very large issue. I'm told that the fracking bill and the regulations therein are some of the most stringent in the nation and possibly even in the world. I know that the legislator, Representative John Bradley, who was really spearheading this effort, was working constantly with not only the Illinois EPA but also the federal EPA to make sure that this bill is very tight. They're hopeful that expanding fracking will lead to jobs, and we'll have to see. I think there's still going to be several months before we actually see any fracking starting. JCAR still has to set rules so that the Department of Natural Resources can actually, before they actually release any permits. So I think we're going to be hearing about this issue probably over the next couple months as some of those rules start getting handed out to DNR so they can start handing out applications and before we actually see any real frackings start taking place. Another bill that had some large implications as it was introduced was House Bill 983. It passed the House in kind of a terrible version. We were able to work with the Senate sponsor when it was in the Senate and have talks with the House sponsor to be able to make this bill less burdensome. What this bill sought to do was to put more strings around the use of AR bonds or double-barrel bonds, as they're commonly known. There was a problem. There's an issue with alternate revenue bonds. They were used to build a golf course, and that caused a lot of problems in a particular region. I won't say the name, but it caused a lot of problems and it made headlines. And so this bill was kind of a result of that. What we ended up being able to negotiate out of this bill was any of the changes that take place in this bill will only affect alternate revenue bonds that are being used for projects that don't have an identified revenue stream. So there was a concern, people use AR bonds or counties use AR bonds for stormwater systems, for large projects, and we didn't want to put too many layers between, the county going out and using AR bonds for very specific projects. And so this bill mainly will target the use of alternate revenue bonds for areas that don't have, identified revenue streams, like your golf course and some of the more entertainment, like uses of water park, etc. So this won't generally affect you unless you use the double barrel bonds for those type of projects. But again, it started out very onerous. We were able to work with the sponsors and limit the scope or the number of projects that this would ultimately affect. I don't know how many counties across the state have used AR bonds, for golf courses or water parks. Typically, when we see them used, they're used for infrastructure and things of that nature. A couple more bills before we move over to the veto session is House Bill 1020. This allows for the demolition of non-residential outbuildings if they're deemed to be hazardous. There was some concern that currently, counties didn't have the authority to do that, and so this is kind of just a cleanup. House Bill 1522. This is another large issue. Unfortunately, it was narrowed down to be a pilot program just for 2 counties. But again, I think this is going to be a first step, and maybe if it's successful, we can go back and expand it to be used by other counties. But the thought process behind this bill is obviously there's a lot of antiquated stormwater infrastructure across the state, particularly those areas that get hit and are in floodplains. And so what this bill sought to do was to allow DuPage and Peoria counties to be able to go out and incentivize businesses to use green infrastructure to remove water from the stormwater system. There's a whole host of fees. There's a fee schedule that the county would need to adopt, and there's a whole host of ways they can have those fees reduced depending on the type of green infrastructure they put in place. So, for instance, you know, if it's a Walmart and they put in trees in the parking lot and they have green spaces in the parking lot, the county could reduce the fee that they would charge Walmart for having the parking lot. There's also new porous asphalt that helps the water actually penetrate down into the ground instead of sitting on top and running off. So this is just kind of a recognition that there's new technologies available, and hopefully some of those technologies can be implemented by the businesses, and even though there's an upfront cost, they'll see some savings on the back end because the county will reduce their fees. The thought process, again, is to take as much water out of the system as possible, therefore reducing strain on the system. House Bill 2418 was another large omnibus election code bill. If you haven't got the sense, this year was the year for omnibus bills. I'm not quite sure why, but there's a whole host of bills that just had a ton of things put in them that were very big and very all-encompassing. And this was the omnibus bill for the election. It made several changes to the election code. Chief among them would be this controversial measure that was kind of buried within the bill and was maybe put in a little more secretly than I think anyone would have liked. What they tried to do was to make a change to Lake County in how they held their election commission. They wanted the chief judge to be able to appoint commissioners to election commission, and Lake County would have to go out and establish an election commission from what they're currently doing, and they estimated that would cost $500,000 to $700,000 to do. So there's a big hubbub about that. However, on November 8th, the Kane County Circuit Court ruled, or judge in Kane County ruled that the new law, violated the Constitution and therefore would be null and void. So I know Lake County was very happy about that. I think there was concern that the General Assembly did this without working with Lake County, and there was certainly concern on my part that we would start to see more things like this where, the General Assembly, for whatever reason, maybe has an axe to grind against a particular county and just decided to slip something, backdoor into a bill and just single out one county. So I'm glad that was struck down. Hopefully that won't become habit. Veto session. The fall veto session wasn't really jam-packed this year. I think the governor only vetoed 10 or so bills, so there wasn't a whole lot of action for the General Assembly to do when they reconvened in Springfield for the fall veto session. That said, there was a thought or thinking that they may take up the pension issue during the veto session. However, they did not. What they did do, and what some of the bills that were considered to be moved were as follows. House Bill 924 is a responsible bidder bill. We've talked about this in the past, or I've talked about this in the past. I think I talked about this last year. What this bill would have sought to do would have mandated that any bidder bidding on a local contract needed to have an apprenticeship program. One of the problems that we had with the bills, we felt that was perhaps a little too onerous for every county to have. There's smaller contractors out there, and I believe, to have an apprenticeship program, it's $10,000 to $25,000 per person. So a lot of smaller contractors just simply wouldn't be able to have an apprenticeship program, and therefore they would be unable to bid on certain projects. We felt that this is a local control issue. Counties can already adopt a responsible bidder provision by ordinance if they so choose to do. We're all for local control. at the County Board Association. So if a county wants to do that, that's fine. If a county doesn't want to do that, that's their prerogative as well. We don't think the state should try to be heavy-handed and assume a one-size-fits-all for all the various counties. So that bill was heard. It was moved out of committee. In the Senate, it passed the House during the spring, so during veto session, it was heard in committee and passed out of the Senate committee, but was held on the Senate floor. I believe more negotiations are going to continue. Senator Don Harmon from Oak Park has taken over sponsorship of the bill, and I know he's planning on sitting down with all the various interested parties and having more dialogue. House Bill 961 is a bill I've also talked about before. This is the local government distribute fund bill. Essentially, right now, when the state collects income tax, they do it at large, and then they pay the percentage that is owed to local governments, the LGD. They pay that later on. A lot of times what happens is the state gets behind on making those payments to local governments because when they collect it at large, it all goes into one pot, and the state tends to pay out their own bills first before they pass that money down to units of local government. What this bill would try to do is say that when the state collects the income tax, a portion of it, our portion, the portion that goes to units of local government in the counties, would go into a separate fund and be paid to counties and other units of local government from that fund without going into the state's general pot. The hope is that then the payments would be done on a much more timely fashion. This bill passed the House in April overwhelmingly, 109-2. It moved to the Senate. Senate President John Cullerton took over sponsorship of the bill and sat on it. Essentially, he refused to allow the bill ever even be assigned to a Senate committee. We met with him numerous times on this bill to try to have him sign over sponsorship to someone who would actually move the bill. He declined. So I don't think this bill is going to go away. This was the first year, I think the bill's been introduced the last 3 or 4 years. This was the first year that the bill actually passed a chamber, and to have done so with so overwhelming numbers, I think is a good sign. Next year, I think the bill will be reintroduced, and hopefully we can have more conversations with President Cullerton to remove his opposition. Another bill that was kind of stalled during veto session is House Bill 1555. ITAP is the Illinois Transparency and Accountability Portal that CMS will be overseeing. Basically, what I think the sponsor and other members of the General Assembly envision is that ITAP will be a one-stop shop for all information. Now, that idea has some pluses and some minuses. One, it's going to create more burden. Counties and other units of local government are going to be required to send things that they normally maybe wouldn't have to send. Now they're going to have to send them to CMS. Some things that they already send to, say, the comptroller or the treasurer's office, now they'll have to send 2 of those. They'll have to send one to the comptroller and make sure they send one to CMS. If they don't, there are some fines and fees that can get handed down from CMS to the unit of local government. One of the positives is that now if the state is going to have this massive searchable portal, maybe that can free up some of the FOIA congestion and burdens placed upon units of local government. So, for instance, if you get a FOIA request, what I would like to see, what I think others would like to see as well, is that if the county received a FOIA request and you know that you sent that information into CMS, you could direct the requester to the website. And I think as technology becomes just more widely used and everyone, is searching things on their phones and whatnot, it makes more sense to just have things posted, and it makes sense to be able to direct people to where they're posted online. But this bill is postponed. The way it was introduced, there was some very burdensome language in here. There was multiple redundancies, double and triple and quadruple redundancies for where things need to be sent. So this bill was slowed down in the Senate. I think we're going to have some more conversations as well on this about ways to reduce some of those redundancies, also as well as maybe to relieve some of the burden that counties are feeling from FOIA. We'll finish up with the special session in pension reform. The House and Senate came in on December 3rd to pass a pension bill. This has been a long time in the making. They've been talking about pensions for, I can't even remember when the last time I didn't talk about pensions was. But what really changed between veto session and between the special session was lawmakers decided on what a number for savings should be. And they decided that the PowerPoint says 160, it may be 150. I think the numbers, they're not crystal clear, but between 150 and 160 over the next 30 years. So this bill does that. It won't go into place until June 1st. We are expecting this to have significant changes once it goes into effect on the state's budget, because as you probably have been reading, over the past couple of years, the state has been increasing the payment to the pension systems by about $1 billion, and that has been pushing other spending to the side, such as education and so on and so forth. So this bill will have obviously $160 billion or so impact over the next 30 years to the state budget, but we should be looking at some type of savings, and I'm not sure savings is probably the most correct term, but we should be looking at some type of effect on the budget in the near future as well. I see there's a question, three-part question. Is there a bill to dissolve township governments? As I know of right now, I have not seen a bill to dissolve township governments. I know that there's been bills in the past to eliminate townships, that via consolidation, or maybe take away some of the responsibilities that they have. But that bill was quickly kind of placed on the back burner. I think the township associations came in very quickly and very swiftly and worked with the sponsor. I want to say on the issue of townships, there is a pretty distinct separation between the role townships play in southern Illinois and the role townships play in northern Illinois, and sometimes it's difficult when you're talking to a Chicago legislator to explain the roads that townships, or the role that townships have in southern Illinois, and why maybe a one-size-fits-all to dissolve township governments doesn't work. In northern Illinois, townships really don't take care of any roads. In southern Illinois, if you get away with all the townships, now the county would have to pick up a lot of different responsibilities, and they don't think about that sometimes. And so when you sit down and you have conversations with them and explain kind of how township government differs between the regions of the state, I think they start to understand that. And to the last part of your question, will this make formation of county road districts mandatory? I think as we start talking to them about the fact that townships in southern Illinois take care of a lot of roads and a lot of miles of roads and all their equipment and things like that, they start to realize it's not quite as simply as dissolving a township. They start to realize that they have a place and why. Now, there has been conversations about setting some type of floor for how much how much road a township would have to have to stay in existence. So I know there are some townships that, or some road districts that are very small, and so there was talk about setting some type of threshold, be it 10 miles, 5 miles, 25 miles. Those conversations have kind of stalled out over the, I would say, this past year. I haven't heard much, Patrick, if that answers your question or not. Were there any more questions? Yes. The question is there a cost shift in Senate Bill 1? And if so, what effect will this have on county budgets? There is no cost shift in Senate Bill 1. Early on, when pension negotiations really started to heat up, Speaker Madigan was very adamant, or was extremely convinced, that the cost shift and the pension reform package needed to be one package. I think he started to get a sense that issue, that pension reform A was going to be hard enough to pass on its own, and that B, the cost shift was far more complex than maybe initially thought. So no, it's not in there. I don't think that we've heard the last of the cost shift. It will just be done. It will be done separately because of the magnitude and implications of what this is going to do, specifically to county budgets, but also to municipal budgets, and likewise into the school district. So it's not part of Senate Bill 1. I do think that conversation is going to continue, though. Were there any more questions? Okay. Well, I thank everyone for being on, and there is another one. Sorry. Is Symbol 1 a precursor for future cost shift provisions? Patrick, I'm not 100% sure how to answer that. I guess I do think we'll see cost shifts in the future. What form they take, I think they'll take whatever form Speaker Madigan and the sponsors of the bill needed to take in order to get to a majority vote. But I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Any other questions for Taylor? Thank you. Thank you so much, Taylor. Very comprehensive. If people have any other questions,
thank you, guys.
Yeah. If anybody has any other questions after they kind of take all this in, how do they get a hold of you?
I think the best way would probably get a hold of Kelly Murray at the County Board Association. She does a great job. Also, let me just move the slide here. She sends out a great newsletter called Counties at the Capitol. She and I go through during the spring session, and we highlight the bills that we feel have the most impact to counties. And she sends that out, I think, bi-weekly.
Wonderful. That'd be a great thing to sign up for, just to get in touch and get information and stay informed. I mean, I think that's really, that's the best thing we can do. And then we can come together at the end and talk about these kind of things. Great. Here's some contact information for everybody. And if there aren't any other questions, then that's the presentation we have for you. And we really appreciate this great information, both from Deborah and from you, Taylor. We appreciate the partnership that we have with the Illinois Association of County Board Members and Commissioners. And we look forward to you guys getting out there and doing all this hard work and keeping us all informed. Thank you.